Hello and welcome to the Series 1 finale of Nisht for Me, the podcast that examines the ins and outs of British Jewish culture. Don't worry though, we will be back before the end of the year with more brand new episodes. But yeah, this is the end of Series 1.
And what a joy it's been!
It has been fun.
It's been really fun. And today we thought we would delve deeper into what I like to call the bubbler industrial complex,
Nice.
i.e. sort of the stereotype of Jewish grandparents, particularly Jewish grandmothers, has been quite potent. And we thought we would sort of look at them and apply them to our own grandparents and sort of figure out the lessons that we've learned from our ancestors.
Some that we'll take with us, I imagine, and some that are probably best left in the past.
I think it's really interesting though, because there's so much chat, not just sort of within the Jewish community, within wider society, about generation versus generation, sort of pitted against each other. And obviously the way we live or the way we grew up was radically different to our grandparents, and also our parents to an extent.
Yeah.
But, there's always, sort of the media, of which I am guilty, sort of pitting, like Gen Z versus millennials, like God forbid you wear a trainer sock, that's a thing. And also sort of, millennials sort of bemoaning the fact that
Bloody boomers.
Exactly.
Bloody boomers.
And they're like tiny house deposits and blah, 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 blah. But actually, I think it's really interesting to look at what lessons we can learn and apply to our own lives in this day and age, and ways in which perhaps our generations are not so wildly dissimilar.
Well, let's do it then. So
Let's do it.
we've each sort of brought 5 to the table, but we may as well go alternately. So do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'm going to talk about my lovely grandma Shirley, who long-time listeners and the friends and family who listen to this know, we lost only a few months ago at the grand old age of 92, the true matriarch of the Radnan family. And perhaps it's a bit of a basic, obvious lesson to start with, but I think the fact that it's so obvious is actually something that stuck out to me. It's just that sort of absolute non-negotiable that family comes first. And that every week growing up, every weekend, and I think you touched on this in another episode, you had something similar, we would all go to my grandma Shirley's house for Shabbos lunch when we were little. So when I say all, that means my family and my auntie and uncle and their children, and also my great uncles and aunties would join at various occasions. So when we were little, that was Shabbos lunch and, it was Saturday afternoon. And then as we got a bit older and teenagers, that all turned into Friday night.
Nice.
And pretty much, and then actually when it became too much, because also it must be said that she was just casually knocking out 4-course lunches for, on average, 10 people each week. And when that got a little bit too much, it then reverted back to sort of like Saturday afternoons, afternoon tea. And literally up until the day she died, we would gather. There would be people at her house on a Saturday afternoon.
Amazing.
Whoever was in town, whoever was free, that was, what I kind of had referred to as base camp. And we would go. And it was just such a natural thing that happened to me growing up.
We did exactly the same. Can I say it was every Shabbos lunch was at my dad's, mum and dad's, until it got a bit too much. Then it became Shabbos afternoon, and we did it, until she was too unwell to do it anymore, basically.
And I don't think I really have given that as much sort of thought and weight as it deserved until sort of recent years, and how important that was, that sort of gravitational force of her sort of slightly overheated living room every week, and how that was just how you live life. And I actually think that sense of, well, you just have a family around your family, was basically the underlying pull of why I would always move back to Manchester from London. I mean, obviously there were sort of variables up for the grabs as to who I would end up with, but in my head, from a young age, I was like, well, yeah, I'll go to London for a bit, or maybe, at some point I toyed with going abroad for a bit. But when it came to having a family, without question, I was doing it around my family.
Yeah.
As it happened, it wasn't so much of a struggle because my husband's from Manchester, and, it was just sort of fait accompli. But that sense of just being around family all the time, which I don't know, is that Jewish thing? Or, I mean, I can't, obviously non-Jewish people spend time with their family.
Of course, yeah. But I think it is, I only can obviously also go off my own, but like I am lucky to have a very close relationship with my cousins, and I wanted the same for my kids. And I now love, like, one of my favourite things is that they love spending time with their grandparents and their cousins. And that's, you know, that's absolutely a product of my upbringing and going there every week. And I was very lucky in that my mum's mum and dad would also come to my grandma's as well. So it was both sides, you know.
Same, totally. My grandma my two grandmas were friends, and actually after my maternal grandma died and after my mum died, because my grandma Shirley is my paternal grandma, my uncle, my mum's brother, would come, you know, because it was just, that's something he'd been doing for decades. And that's where he would say, you know, oh, you're going to Shirley's this Shabbos, you know. It was just something we did. And I remember being quite young. It's funny that when your kids go to the primary school that you attended, because I can see it so clearly, just that stood outside the sort of school hall door with my mum chatting to the then choir teacher of North Cheshire, the infamous Mrs. Worrell. And for all North Cheshire alumni listening, you know, if you know, you know.
It's a difficult, I didn't even go. Difficult language.
Her legacy lives on. I mean, also the fact that she was the choir teacher, and there were sopranos. What's the lower range? I don't know what they were. And there were also what she coined question marks. Do you know about this?
Yeah, I think I've heard this
before.
before.
Basically you had to mime.
But I love that it was given the name question mark.
I guess. So good.
The amount of musical notes you could have called it is a euphemism, but no, just go question mark.
So good. And I remember just chatting to her, and it must have been a point in my primary education where I had two sets of cousins there. So my dad was one of three. He had a brother and a sister, and their kids were also at the school. And I remember my mum explaining, oh yeah, we all go to their grandma's every week for lunch. And Mrs. Worrell, who was Israeli, so presumably far from home and far from family, I remember her saying, oh, how lovely is that? How wonderful is that? And I remember being obviously relatively young and thinking, that's something that's different, like, or not. It's not a given. And again, it was one of those kind of conversations you hear as a child that stick with you. And it's just not a given. And having lived away from home, having had a child away from home, the hunger for that became so much more pronounced. And it's something that, you know, I hope that we can continue now that sort of Grandma Shirley has gone. That is that sense of, you know, that sense of where we're all going to gather, and perhaps it isn't on a weekly basis. We are spread a bit further and wider now, but my plan is, especially as the kids get older and, you know, they can sort of stay up later on a Friday night and not be entirely feral. I've not got to that point yet. That's something I'd love to recreate, because I think it is foundational in terms of...
I think the place as well, though, certainly from a memory point of view, becomes almost a character in your childhood as well. 100%. Like, I can completely picture my grandparents' house, both of theirs, but talking about Shabbos lunch, and like, oh, that's the door where Nicola lost a bit of her thumb, just to add a bit of trauma in there. Or, you know, that, and I wasn't going to say, like, she didn't lose her virginity against that.
Didn't need to spell it out.
Didn't need to spell it out at all. Okay, we'll scrap that. Sorry, I know Nicola actually listens. She comments sometimes. Thank you, Nicola.
Hi, Nicola.
But, like, that's, you know, that's where that happened. That's where we would go and put, you know, fizzy refreshers in Coke and try and make things explode, and it never really worked. But,
Mega lads.
You know, absolute. But, you know, like, that's the, you know, the settee where I would sit and do my Auntie Sharon's hair, playing hairdressers. Because boys can do that too.
Mega lads.
Mega lads. lads. You know, all sorts.
You're right, it's really visceral. I can remember the feel of my grandma and grandpa's dining table was quite old fashioned, and it had one of those, it was wooden and, you know, kind of dark mahogany, and it had those kind of metal claws on the feet.
on the feet.
And you know, obviously we took your shoes off, and I can feel my toes sort of skimming the metal claws through my
I
sock.
used to sit at one end of the dining table, and my grandpa would sit on the other at Shabbos lunch. And one of my favourite memories was that we would look at each other through like the 7-Up bottles and stuff, and we would sort of like look at like and see how like the shape changed when you were going through the water. But no one else knew this was going on, but we were just doing it during the meal.
Talking of shape changing over a dining table, my grandpa's fake eye once popped out over at the dining table on a Friday night, which was a memorable treasure.
Wow! Did it go into the soup? I like to think it was next to a Canadian.
Somebody mistook it for a Canadian.
One of the eggs. Who's fucked the butcher this week?
We have that joke. What is that joke? And where did it come from?
I have no idea.
That's another episode.
Like, that's how you get those eggs.
So So yes, I think it's one of those lessons that I 100% want to continue.
Yeah.
Because as much as we could wind each other up and disagree and get on each other's nerves, I feel stronger for that incredible safety net that she built and my grandpa built for us. You know, obviously our family have taken some hits, but I feel like she built those foundations so that whatever life threw at us, we could withstand them. And that is what I want for my children as well.
Oh, absolutely. Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Okay, so what have I got in the locker here? I feel like I'll go for a shorter, sharper one, just for now, and then we can, you know.
It's going to go high-low.
Highs and lows, yeah. This is some lowbrow. Well, no, but so both of my grandmas were surprising in a way. Obviously, both from a completely different generation. Both, you know, quite. Well, no, I wouldn't describe my mum's as old-fashioned in a way, but you know, we would see them every Shabbos. They would come to the house a lot, and weirdly, one of the things I remember about my grandma Nan is that she developed arthritis quite early on. And as a result, when we come back from America, I think, my dad had thought, I'll buy her a Game Boy because that could be good for her hands kind of thing.
Okay.
So my grandma was the first one in our extended family at a time when everyone was on the Game Boy to complete Super Mario. So the thing I learned from my grandma was how to complete Super Mario.
Amazing.
One thing I learned from my grandma. And she was amazing on it. She was an absolute whiz.
Amazing.
At it. And it was also very good for arthritis. So, fans, that's, you know, if anyone's struggling out there, get yourself a Game Boy. I think they might have come on a bit. But in the same vein, my other grandma, my mum's mum, was very, very intelligent woman.
I think she worked for my grandpa at some point.
Quite possibly, yeah, she did. She did, definitely. I remember I've heard her talk about that. But she also went on to work at UMIST at a time in town, which is the sort of, I think it was like the science and technology part of the university. It's now just part of Manchester University. But there was a strong like computing heritage there, and obviously they were working in an office with computers before most people had home computers. So my grandma became our PC support.
Amazing.
If ever there was a problem with the computer, with, you know, early internet and stuff, my grandma would be the one who would come round and fix it for us. And she still, until very recently, she was still going to teach like elderly people at the Nicky Alliance Centre. Nicky Alliance or the Nissan Sumac Centre? One of the two brilliantly named places where old people gather. That's what I like to think happens there. She was still teaching like a Silver Surfers course there. And it was brilliant, although there was one shattering moment where my grandma needed to do something on the computer after dinner and came upstairs and some porn popped up. I was trying to get to fix something and it was clearly something that I'd been doing and it popped up on the screen and I was like, oh God, kill me now.
How did she react?
She reacted amazingly. She just sort of like looked away. I think either she minimised it or I was like scrabbling over and minimising it. She was like, we don't need to tell anybody about that.
Did she say
she literally, and that was it.
I'm sure she'll be delighted that you've told the
I mean, it wasn't her wrongdoing. It was entirely me. She just wanted to save me the embarrassment.
Oh, bless her.
And that as well is just a thing of like my grandma Claire and my grandma Nan, who's since passed, she was the Game Boy genius. My grandma Claire would do and continues to do anything for anyone, no matter how far it is, even if it's covering up earth-shatteringly embarrassing moments for her grandchildren.
Yeah, because I wonder if she told her mates or something. It's the sort of thing.
Well, she did play bridge. It would be a good opener. But you know what? I like to think she wouldn't. She wouldn't, even though she would have got a laugh from it. If it was me and it was my kids and grandkids, it'd be on a podcast.
We did have a whole monologue about wiping your son's
ass
last
true.
episode.
So.
So.
Anna pulled me up on that this week and was like, how do you think that's going to feel when he's older? And I was like, he was 6 at the time. It's fine. Sure, he'll nail bum cleanliness, bum hygiene.
Grandma Claire's sense of privacy.
Yeah. So that's
good ones. I want to talk about my grandpa Charlie now, who sadly I never got to meet. He died. He's my mum's dad, and he died 6 months before I was born. And so really, it's interesting to me what I know of him because obviously my children don't know. Lily never met my dad, and Mikey, had 9 months of my mum, and Lily only 3 years. So it's interesting thinking about what my takeaways are from someone who was obviously so important to the people in my life, but who I never got to meet. And I started off with I learned, via my grandma, but from him, an amazing sort of Yiddish swearing phrase.
Right.
Which is, and I hope I've got it right, I kind of got no one here to pull me up on it, but Gay kakin sufiam, which means, delightfully, go and shit in a river.
Oh, phenomenal.
I mean, I think that probably, for me, just made me fall in love with the Yiddish language, because, I mean, what a phrase. I mean, like, perhaps a little bit on the nose these days, what with our polluted rivers, but so we don't advocate it. But just gay kakin sufiam, like go and shit in a river. It's just, if you break it down, it's just brilliant. And and it was just something that I had always known that he had said, and made me very fond of him.
Oh, I love that.
I'm
going to start using that. Say slowly.
I think it's gay kak in sufiam.
Gay kakin sufiam.
But again, I will be easily corrected, because I could have slightly mispronounced there. But the other thing I remember, my grandma Edie, who was then a long time widow, and there was something that I never appreciated growing up. She would always talk about him with this sense of like, he was such a lovely man, and I can't believe he chose me. In this sort of, I was so lucky to have been his. Oh. And it really obviously sort of impacted me. And now I've met Jamie, I know what she's talking about.
Oh, that's really lovely.
So fond memories, choice memories of my grandpa Charlie, which was sort of refracted through my other family members.
That's lovely. My grandpa David, my mum's dad, always used to say about his dad, who was a real character who we never got to meet. He'd always say, he would have gone mad for you boys. Aww. And we say the same now to our kids about him, in that he was so much fun and would have gone, just the thought of having him in their lives is a lovely thought. The memory is still there. Yes. But my next one fits in very well with gay kakin sufiam, because this is the thing that was, in a weird way, so present throughout our childhood, is the lesson that everything sounds better in Yiddish.
Wholeheartedly concur.
And this came mainly from my grandpa, Henry, it was his first language. Yiddish was his first language, but he only really spoke it with my auntie Manya, who is his surviving sister, who lived round the corner from him for most of their lives when they came back here. But so there were always, and all of my grandparents had smatterings of Yiddish, because their parents will have spoken it usually as their first language. So they all had these amazing phrases and sayings, which some of them we've sort of taken on and kind of use, just willy-nilly in language. I'm not saying willy-nilly is a Yiddish phrase, I don't think it is. It'd be something more like schmeckel weckel or weckel schmeckel, weckel neckel. Either way.
That's another one for the merch.
yeah. But,
what's your Hamish flex? Your schmeckel weckel.
But it was what he would always use that. We knew he would use that phrase. One of my greatest pleasures in life was listening to my grandpa Henry tell an old joke, a Yiddish joke, because he would start out and they were usually quite long and, contrived and all over the place. So you'd have to really concentrate, but then you'd get to a certain point in the joke and he would start pissing himself laughing whilst telling it, which was the true joy of the whole thing. Like, that was what made it hilarious, was that he could barely get through it without, coughing, laughing, almost like completely creasing up. And then you'd stay with it, you'd stay with the story, it would build to a punchline, he'd say the punchline, and you'd just sort of be left going like, is that it? Is that the bit? And to which he would always reply, it sounds better in Yiddish. And that was the thing, is that you can't quite translate that humour. And it's often, so around the houses, such a weird sense
logic.
Often born out of, I think, the living conditions that they were living in, often quite poor shtetl life sort of things, that you would grasp onto these different things. But it was always that thing of, sounds better in Yiddish. We did once put his car in, his sat-nav in Yiddish as well, once, which he was delighted with.
And could he go in the right direction?
I mean, I don't think the sat-nav would have had much bearing on that by that point in life. By that point in life, I think he was rolling up his sleeve to get out of speeding tickets and stuff, which worked surprisingly well.
I'm not surprised. Yeah, I love my kids like the odd bits of Yiddish. Like Mikey the Meshuggah, because he is. And sometimes I call him, which is not true Yiddish, I call him a Schmerel Pops.
But no, I think that's. But I think a lot of the Yiddish that we know is anglicised Yiddish as well. And I think there's like, you can get, even around the UK, you get sort of geographical Yiddishism. So I remember creasing up when one of Anna's Scottish friends told me that they used to call kuchen milchige cake, which is just, there's too many ch's in that. Milchige cake.
It does not sound appetising.
No, but that's the name for it in Glasgow.
Yeah.
So I think Schmerel Pops is absolutely valid. It's just, it's taking it on another.
You know, my love of it is, you know, sort of expressed in the title of this podcast.
Absolutely, yeah. Which again, there are a couple of things with Nisht in it that I sort of grasped onto later in my grandpa's life, which was, I feel like there's a lot of things in Yiddish for like meh. Yeah. Basically for like meh. But it's Nisht Salsa, Nisht Pfeffer, which is like, it's neither salt nor pepper. It's like, it's just a bit like bland, I guess. Or Nisht Hina, Nisht Heina, which is just like neither here, neither there.
Love it. Sounds
so much better in Yiddish, exactly.
It sounds like a nursery rhyme.
I know, Nisht Hina, Nisht Heina. Nisht Salsa, Nisht Pfeffer.
Yeah. My next one is from my lovely Grandma Edie, who was married to Grandpa Charlie, who I just spoke about, and as explained, was a widow for a number of years, because she must have only been early 60s. Yeah. And she didn't die until just shy of her 95th birthday. And she was obviously widowed as I came along, and we had a very special bond. Yeah. She was in our lives in such a huge way. In fact, you know, we would often take her on holidays with us. And my mum told this story at her funeral, how somebody remarked on holiday to her, "What a wonderful daughter you have, taking you on holiday." And she said, "No, what a wonderful son-in-law I have." You know, she was very sort of respectful. She would apparently be with my mum and us sort of all day and make sure that she left before my dad got home from work. This is obviously when my mum wasn't working, when we must have been really young. Yeah. And that kind of really respectful of those boundaries, and that, you know, she said, there are so many lessons I could pick from her. She was my babysitter growing up. Yeah. Like, and it must have been sort of, you know, when my brother was going to bar mitzvahs or just, you know, doing his own thing. And I just have a lot of memories of just her and me on a Saturday night, you know, watching the Eurovision Song Contest and being together when Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated, you know, really. And at the time, because I was like 12 or something, you know, some of my friends had teenage babysitters and I was a bit jealous. But how grateful I am for all of those evenings and the time spent. But this is actually pertaining to when my grandpa Harold died, so that he was the first grandparent I lost, sort of obviously not including Grandpa Charlie, and I was 16. And so the first time I had sort of been sort of dealt sort of death and grief and sort of attending a funeral, little did I know then that I'd basically be like an elite club member by the time I was in my late 30s. But going to his funeral was obviously very upsetting. And I remember my grandma Shirley getting out the car and she looked around and she went, "Oh, I'm looking for him," because, you know, it was just this sort of instinct, the reflex that she'd had. So I was sort of witnessing all of this, and I was a 16-year-old girl in bits. And my grandma Edie grabbed my hand and sort of quietly whispered, "Stop crying now." And she's like, and then she did not let go of my hand. And I think that message was, you crying isn't helping the people around you. And I was thinking, you know, I thought about it so many times. Was it sort of repress your emotion? And that's not a lesson to me. But actually it was time for you to be strong for other people now. Yeah. And she said, you know, and she didn't let go of my hand, you know, she's like, "I'm here for you. So you've got me." Oh. But, you know, again, not expressed, not articulated. Both of my grandmas were sort of, you know, they chose their words very carefully. They weren't overly sort of emotive or what have you. I don't know if that's just a hallmark of their generation and being a little bit more
there's an
reserved.
element of that, yeah.
And and in that moment, I learned sort of just being strong for other people. And I obviously never appreciated sort of, how she lived her life and, being alone and, for that many years and what she sort of shouldered. And yeah, that's what I learned in that moment.
So interesting. I have a similar memory of my grandpa David's funeral. I was incredibly lucky to have all 4 of my grandparents till I was like 23. It was amazing. And my grandpa David was the first to pass away, and he'd been declining for some years, but he was always the grandpa that we would play with. Like, he was so fun-filled. And he would give us fireman's lifts up the stairs whenever we came to stay. Wow. And we used to march around the living room with him singing "With Soldiers of the Queen, my lads," which is something we've all tried to sort of recreate with our kids and stuff in his sort of memory. But I remember vividly at his funeral the hug that my grandpa Henry gave me. And they were very different. They were very fond of each other, but they were very different men. And I just remember he didn't say anything, but I remember hugging him and him hugging extra tight. And that was what kind of, sort of broke the almost the dam there, because it was sort of like, I think he knew that he was our only grandpa now, but it was going to be okay kind of thing. But in that small gesture, because he wasn't my grandpa Henry, we were extremely close, but he wasn't, we weren't touchy-feely or huggy or whatever. Yeah. But that, I vividly remember that. And I know that my brother does as well. I think it was something that he just, in that moment, he sort of, said something more than words said. And it's quite similar to...
very similar. Very similar.
Gosh.
Yeah.
God, we're going to be a mess by the end of this. Remember, my grandma family looking at porn. Okay?
Keep that in your mind.
Keep it in mind. Keep it light. Keep it light.
What's your next lesson? Does it involve porn?
It doesn't involve porn. Thankfully, there's only one porn grandparent tangent of the Venn diagram.
If there was more.
Oh, God. No, mine next is... both 2 of my grandparents independently tried to teach me a sense of direction. I have no sense of direction.
Oh my God, you're the worst.
I'm the worst.
I've only just learnt this about you. When we tried to meet up at the Oasis concert in Heaton Park, and you were like, "Yeah, I'm just by a pole with a sign." I'm like, Arron, what the fuck?
Worse than that though, because I'm entirely reliant, and I'm lucky that like SatNav came along when it did, but I'm still entirely reliant on SatNav. I would learn. I know how to get to a few places. Like even now when I'm driving to North Manchester, I basically drive to my grandma's house and then go where I need to go. Basically, effectively. Like I've been able to shave a few roads off it, but similarly, I learned to drive to like our friend Bozzy's house in Cheadle, and then I would go to where I needed to go in Cheadle. And that I just, whatever part of the brain it is that gives you a sense of direction, I do not have. Now, there were 2 ways in which my grandparents tried to teach me. My grandma Claire, who was the computer whiz, she was like an A to Z, like a human A to Z, at the times where you were still using A to Z. So she would be the one that I would call if ever I, for example, found myself turning into 3 lanes of oncoming traffic. I would quickly pull over, call her and be like, "I'm absolutely lost in Manchester town centre and I don't know how to get home. Please, can you help me?"
No.
And she would literally direct me home. And it was amazing that both her and my grandpa David, how they would argue about the quickest way to go, and they all knew every single way around everywhere. And
like black cab drivers.
Yeah, whereas I was clueless. But my favourite story about my terrible sense of direction comes from my grandpa Henry, who lived on Old Hall Road in Broughton Park, which is the road that Broughton Park, it's actually called Clowes Park, is actually on. And he lived maybe 6 doors down from the park. And I think it was either a Saturday afternoon and we were there anyway, or it was a Sunday when he used to take us for bike rides in the park. We used to go a lot with him. And my brother and whoever else we were with had raced ahead at the end of our park visiting to go back to his house. And it was just me and my grandpa, and we came to the exit of the park, and my grandpa looked at me, and I looked at him, and he goes, "So which way are we going?" And I sort of looked around and was like, I'm not sure. And he was like, "Well, which way?"
How old were you?
Oh, like maybe 9-ish. Like, okay. I should have known. Okay. Like, there's no excuse for not knowing. Maybe 9, 10, maybe a bit younger. And he's like, so which way are we going? And I said, I don't know. And he just sort of looked at me blankly. And I said, well, we'll go this way then. And we went left. And bearing in mind, he was 6 doors down to the right. We walked for about half an hour all the way around the block until we got to his house. And it was a lovely memory in that we just got to spend some nice time together. But I'll never forget when we got back to the house, he was like, you won't make that mistake again, will you? But it was just the fact that he didn't say anything. He didn't say you're right or you're wrong. I just probably knew about 10 minutes in that we'd gone drastically wrong somewhere. And that was just the different ways of teaching a lesson, was that my grandma would just be there at the end of the phone. You do this, you do that, you do the other. And my grandpa would be like, how can we teach a lesson out of this?
You find out for yourself.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, my next one is also about my grandpa Harold, who I think, similarly to your other grandpa, you had that kind of sense of fun and joy. He was the one in the Norwegian Navy. He was the one who liked to drink. You know, you're having one Fred every Friday night. But again, I was 16 when he died, so not loads of memories, but obviously from being there every Shabbos afternoon, that, you know, we did spend time together, and he, you know, my memories of him are being, you know, quite affable and jolly up to a point when he would then say, bloody kids are so loud, and go and shut himself in the lounge, which is, again, I can relate now. But he used to say something to me, and I assume this is Yiddish. He used to say, Abigail, you have the gift of the gab. The gab is Yiddish?
I guess, yeah. Yeah. It sounds it.
And, you know, considering he only knew me in my sort of early teenage, up to my early, you know, being 16, I took on board. And as someone who could chat a lot of shit with confidence. And he was convinced I was going to be a barrister. And unfortunately for him, I did not pursue that path. However, I do now co-present a podcast where I feel my gift of the gab shines. It perhaps isn't schlepping the same knackers for him in, you know, wherever he may be watching down and listening. But yeah, he was right. But yeah, that's my memories.
I love that.
One memory of him.
I think that gift of the gab is a thing that is in danger of dying out a little bit as well, in that I think, so, you know, for so many of our families, we were the first or maybe second generation that went to like university or the rest of it. But most of our grandparents, you know, kind of either made it off their own back or they, you know, worked the markets, or they traded, or they worked in the, you know, the sort of textile industry, which was a big Jewish industry as well. And I think you needed the gift of the gab to get by. Yeah. You know, you needed that sort of, it was a lot where things were a lot more face to face. And I think we often now, where a lot of things are over a screen or over a thing, we don't get to exercise that muscle.
No, you're
and I think
absolutely
it gets lost a bit.
You still see it in sort of our generation and certain members of the community where you're like, that is old school schmooze. This is not a Jewish thing at all. But when my first sort of job at a newspaper was at the Times, I was the editorial assistant, and I used to look after the work experience who would come in for maybe a week or two. And the way that they did it at the Times, at the time, it might have changed now, is that they were pretty much all Oxbridge kids. Sure. Because that was the way they filtered out, you know, who could possibly be good enough to do 1 week's unpaid work with them. And all of them were terrified of picking up the phone. And I, you know, in sort of, look, I wasn't on the daily, I was on the weekly, but still, you got to get shit done by a certain deadline. Can you just find out, well, I've sent them an email. I'm like, well, just pick up the phone and ask them that one particular question. And I was not that much older than, maybe like 5-6 years older than them. But it struck me then, and that's, again, not a Jewish thing, that's just that generation. And I just remember thinking, they've got to learn to get better at the phone if they want to make it in this game. And they were all meant to be the creme de la creme of the
It's
of
true.
The
it's so interesting. Though, I hate the phone. And I wish, I'm not someone who's not a confident speaker, but I hate using the phone because it's so exposing. So I probably made those mistakes younger on, but I love but someone who doesn't, it's that gift of the gab.
Do you know what I found? They were like, I'm getting on the phone to try and get people to do stuff for me, or things that get them to change their mind, is that the more northern I go, the more chance I've got of getting my desired result. I
worked with an amazing guy who is now largely doing like content creation. He's brilliant. He's called Matty Good Vibes. Look him up. He's a brilliant guy. Very, very. So he's from Stockport originally. He's got a very strong Manchester accent. And he used to work with me on like Through the Keyhole. And often we'd be filming, you know, very late notice. We'd basically be filming a sketch. We need a sort of 1960s sort of milk truck. And within like 10 minutes, he'd have 3 for you. And he'd be like, I've been chatting to this guy, just needs to know where he can get rid of his milk on the day. And then he can do this and he can bring this and that and the other. And also like we used to film where like you'd need, you know, a construction team to stop drilling at 3 doors down or whatever. And you'd just send Matty over and he'd be like, right, lads, can you just stop for like 10 minutes or whatever? Like, whereas if I'd gone over, it would have been like, excuse me, please could
you possibly?
Yeah, and he got shit done. And he absolutely, not Jewish, but had the gift of the gab.
Yeah, real talent.
Yeah,
that.
absolutely.
And you're right, it's worrying that it's dying out. How do we exercise the muscle?
Don't know, let's get on that.
Get them all to start very niche podcasts. Right, what's next?
So my next one comes from my grandpa David, who was our sort of fun-loving grandpa. He actually grew up in the East End and then moved when he was quite young to Manchester. So he grew up in the East End of London and moved down to Manchester. And he was an only child. And the lesson we learned from him is don't fight with your siblings, because he used to get so upset when Mark and I would fight in front of him, or we would bicker or argue or whatever. And he was such a big softie that often he would start like crying. And he would be like, I don't understand how you can fight with each other. How you've got each other. It's the most fun time. And it was a very effective way of stopping you in your tracks when your fun-loving grandpa is suddenly crying because you guys are having a crack at each other over something utterly ridiculous.
Yeah.
But I think it was just that early thing that actually, you know, you don't know how lucky you are to have a, you know, kind of a brother, I think was his thinking there. And Mark and I are very lucky in that we are very close. And he was a big softie. Like he used to come to, he loved all the old musicals and stuff. And he had a really lovely voice, actually.
Really?
Very handsome guy. He had like movie star good looks when he was younger and he could hold a tune. But like
You must find an old photo. So we can
yeah, absolutely. We've got some good ones.
Yeah.
But he would also come to my other grandma and grandpa's on a Shabbos afternoon. And I remember once it was quite, you know, about 10 different conversations going on in the living room. And I think Guys and Dolls was on the TV. And everyone was just, you know, doing their own thing. I remember catching a look at my grandpa and he just had tears. He had the biggest smile on his face, but tears streaming down his face. And it was just those old songs that just had got him again.
Yeah.
But he was the sweetest man, but also the most fun man. And someone who, for me, when he was, you know, not in his absolute latter years, but was someone that was the embodiment of, you know, just being happy and happy with his lot. You know, he wasn't a wealthy man, but he was happy with his lot and could find joy in lots of those moments. And I think he also knew that, certainly with Mark and I specifically, that we would be all right because we'd always have each other kind of thing.
That's nice.
So, yeah.
I think it's interesting, like, you talking about your grandpa David makes me think of when Mikey was born, I had a little speech prepared for his bris, which I actually couldn't read out in the end because I was very emotional and it was very hot. And Mikey was screaming. And he needed to be fed. And I gave it to Jamie, which must have been weird for him to read out because Mikey is named after, my dad was Michael. His middle name is Charlie, after my grandpa Charlie. And his Hebrew name actually also encompasses Jamie's grandpa Merson, who I did have the privilege of meeting, who I was very fond of him. And I remember in that speech talking about Merton only passed in 2020, sort of in COVID. And I remember the condolences pouring in, you know, to Jamie's mum at the time and how similar they were in tone to when my dad died. And it was this sort of sense of a very kind man. A very kind man. And I just think in this day and age of toxic masculinity and whatnot, just that sort of example of being a kind, soft man. Yeah. I think it's so key to sort of young boys growing up in like better ways. I know,
it's interesting how delighted I'd be if, you know, please God, in many, many years from now, that's how I was described, and I think that's what my grandpa was. Oh, cheers, love.
But yeah, and that's what, and I remember thinking that's the legacy that I wanted Mikey to embody. If you could be a kind, you know, do whatever you want, but if you could be a kind man.
He's a very kind kid. He's doing well.
Yeah, I mean, it depends whose turn it is on the TV, but yeah. So my final lesson, my grandma Shirley could conformed to stereotype in many ways. She was quite traditional Jewish grandma. She could be quite stubborn, and she liked things the way she liked things.
Yeah.
So this particular lesson took me by surprise, and it just goes to show that not everyone conforms to stereotypes, and stereotypes only go so far.
Yeah.
But she was obviously quite keen to see her grandchildren settle down. And in fact, I really can't remember if I've told the story in the pod, so please, I'm sorry. I have told the story a lot, but I remember when I turned 28, and I remember being stood in her kitchen being like, Grandma, can you believe I'm 28? As though it was like, oh God, I'm so old. I mean, what an idiot. And I remember her going, yeah, what are you going to do about it? I remember being like, And actually, I had just met Jamie, and it was really early days, but I felt compelled to tell her about him. And I was like, well, I have met this nice boy. Anyway, but as things kind of progressed, and she told all of her grandchildren this, try before you buy.
Love that.
Which, considering the woman that she was surprising, but it basically meant live with them first. And this was a lady who got married at 19 and had a baby at 21, and was of a generation where trying before you buy was non-existent.
Yeah, would not fly.
So, and they had a very happy, successful marriage. And so it wasn't a reflection of that. It was more, I don't know, it was just sort of, try before you buy, which I really thought was a reflection of her looking at the world around her, looking at the way her grandchildren lived and how different it was to the way she was raised, and giving us advice based on the moment, not based on her own experience.
That's amazing. Yeah.
And it was a real sort of flashpoint for me of sort of, this is someone who grows, who can grow and who can change a mind and who can adapt. And another example of that to me was when my cousin Dan came out and found his lovely partner Sam, and they got married. And the way that this woman from an entirely different time, raised in an entirely different way, and, sort of around a world that was obviously much less accepted and embraced. And, I remember when Dan and Sam got married, they had a gorgeous wedding in their back garden, but they had a sort of the more official, formal type of the wedding in a very small ceremony in, I think it's like a non-denominational chapel in Hale Barnes, like just behind where they live actually. And it was very small. It was like just parents and grandparents. And my grandma Shirley kept being like, and yes, and she referred to the ceremony as the Ufruf. She was like, well, obviously I'm going to the Ufruf as well. And I just loved everything about it because it was sort of accept and embrace, but make it Hamisher. Yeah. I just think I've often thought about those sort of tones. And similarly, when my dad got ill and eventually died, my mum, partnered with Ian, and she was with him for 12 years, and he became part of our family. And my grandma, who was my dad's mum, accepted him and brought him into our family. Amazing. And which might not have been that easy for her. Yeah. And he was still part of our family even after my mum died. And again, it was just this way that this woman who had had a fair few knocks in life grew, evolved, changed her mind. And it's a real example to me of, we're all so bloody sure of ourselves these days, and our beliefs and our convictions and what's right and what's wrong. And, sometimes you just have to move with the times. And that's what she taught me. And I think fundamentally it's a kind of going back to what I talked about at the beginning, is family comes first. Everything else doesn't matter, because you make sure that your family are happy and around each other and together at all costs. And I'm not sure she would necessarily consider these things costs, but it's just where her priorities lay.
I love that. And really wise. And in the initial instance of what you were saying as well, of try before you buy, in terms of live together first. Moving in together is the hardest thing to do. Like, that's much harder than, getting married or whatever.
For sure.
And it's absolutely, Okay, so my last one has 3 question marks after the end of it as to whether it is a good lesson, but it's a lesson. And that lesson is the customer is always right. Question mark, question mark, question mark. And I would say that the person I've mainly got this in mind with was my grandpa Henry. But also my grandma Claire's an excellent complainer. And sometimes she will complain about, you know, like about 3 different things about the same coffee. And that can be excruciating, as she will, you know, we've told her that it's not going to come as a shock. But my grandpa Henry, what was the sort of lovable element of it was that it was usually, like, he would never complain about anything for himself really, but it was for my grandma Nan, his wife. If something wasn't right, he wanted it perfect for her. But his manner of going about it would be that he could fly off the handle and absolutely lose his rag with some poor, unsuspecting member of staff.
Is this when he'd get his arm tattoo out?
No, he rarely got it out for complaining about food, but he would... I think, for one thing, I think your filter obviously goes when you get a bit older.
Can't
anyway.
wait. Cannot wait.
You're in trouble. Or anyone around you is in trouble. But I remember both hearing about and being present for arguments that included the length of lokshen in a bowl of chicken soup. It's too long. It's too long. You got to cut it. Otherwise, it's like eating spaghetti. You know, that was an argument he had in what was JS in North Manchester. Nice. Another one was when we were all decamped to Israel for, I think it was for Pesach. And the first 2 days of the breakfast buffet, they'd had these pancakes, which my grandma had taken quite a liking to. Come third day, the pancakes weren't there and there were waffles. What's the bloody problem? You had and it was literally a full-blown shouting match of like, why can't you had the pancakes on day 1, day 2? You keep the pancakes. She likes the pancakes. And it was just, I mean, it's hilarious to watch, but it was also sort of like, I don't think this is the way, you know, we should necessarily go about things. But I think the thing is that both he and my grandma Nan they had their ways. They had their things. They liked plain food, you know, not as in like aeroplane food. I mean, like just quite plain food. My grandpa liked fish on the bone. Every question, you know, everywhere we went, is it on the bone? Is it on the bone? Much better on the bone. Much better on the bone because you get all the flavours of the bones and the bone marrow and the rest of it.
Because would he eat all of the little bones?
He did debone it, but he would just, you know, everything. That's where the flavour was. And probably my favourite memory of him though was when he and my grandma came down to Oxford to see me and to visit, and he was
schlepping all the knackers.
He was very proud that he had a grandson at Oxford, but he was like, you know, he was marvelled at like the architecture and everything and walking around. But getting them off the train, getting them to the hotel, and we got to the reception there. It was quite a fancy hotel there in Oxford where they were staying. And the first thing he said to them, they were like, "Oh, hello, mister." And he just went, "Do you do kippers?" And he meant for breakfast on the bone. But that has become, I want to get that made into a piece of art. Just the phrase, "Do you do kippers?" And occasionally he would catch sight of himself in these moments that were objectively funny to witness. And if he did catch sight of himself, he'd smirk and he'd go, "It's better than going to the pictures." And that would be another one of his things. It was like coming to their house was often better than going to the pictures.
I bet.
And yeah, so that's the lesson I learned from him and my grandma is the customer's always right. Question mark, question mark, question mark. That was a fun format. I enjoyed that.
That was really fun. I hope other people enjoyed it. And I'd love to hear other people's memories of
things they've learned from their grandparents.
Yeah, and any other memories that perhaps you could read out in a funny Polish Mancunian accent.
It sort of sometimes goes into like Italian when it gets agitated.
Okay, so I think we're at our niche for me. My grandma Shirley was a fantastic cook and baker. She was known for it. You know, if you mentioned that you enjoyed a cinnamon kuchen or a butter for which she was famous, the butter kuchen, and you know it would just be on your doorstep with a post-it that would say "butter me." So she was renowned for all sorts of desserts, which I enjoyed. There was one that just niched for me, and it's not necessarily because Grandma Shirley made it; it's just what it is, and that is lokshen pudding.
My grandma Nan made a great lokshen pudding, and I like it.
Just in case anybody doesn't know, lokshen is essentially what? Tagliatelle?
It's noodle, yeah.
It's noodles. I don't want pasta pudding. Nisht for me. There's nothing about it. And it became really stodgy with cinnamon and some raisins thrown in. Yeah. And I just, when she brought that out at the end of a Friday night, I'd be like, oh, well, just a bit of fruit. Actually, no, to be fair, there would always be an alternative. But
I know what you mean. I think I like it because it's a bit nostalgic rather than it wouldn't come close to my sort of top 10 puddings.
Texturally, it's just so wrong.
And very oily as well. There's a lot of oil in there,
Is
I think.
everything, it's just the fact that it's like dessert but pasta. Nisht for me.
Fair, I get that. So yeah, mine are also from my grandparents' houses, both of their houses respectively. The first one was a rule that was never enforced that stringently, but it was evident at both grandparents' houses, which is you can't have a drink before soup. Why? I want a drink. But you don't drink before the soup course, basically. And then after the soup, because a soup is a drink or something like that. So there was that rule that we wouldn't have drinks on the table until after soup. Even though soup is a hot, food-based
Often
thing.
Salty as well.
Yeah,
if it's chicken
a nice
soup.
fizzy drink to go on the side to
for
that.
Sure.
But no, that was a rule. But it wasn't. The kids were allowed around it, but it was very much something that all of our parents knew was like, you can't possibly have drink before soup. And the other thing, which I just think is bullshit, even now when I hear it, both either from my grandmas but other people as well, the sort of nice cup of tea on a hot day. Piss off. No, a nice Fanta orange is famously the most quenching of
what about San Pellegrino limonata for the
I do like
class.
that, but it's just now I'm more about a kind of a Diet Coke or a Fanta orange is what's going to quench my thirst.
Yeah.
Apple tie's a great drink, doesn't quench your thirst.
Apple cider was often on my grandma's Shirley's table,
But crucially, it doesn't quench thirst. That's what I've found recently anyway. They do it at the Village Cafe. Absolutely not. Purely anecdotal.
So neither of those
Nisht for me.
Nisht for you. Well, that was really fun and I've enjoyed it. And as I've enjoyed doing every single episode with you, we hope that you've enjoyed listening.
Absolutely.
We will be back. We've got to 10 episodes and we thought time to regroup, time to plan ahead. We've got some plans.
Yeah, we do.
We're cooking some things up.
We've got possibly some good guests coming up as well.
Yeah, we do.
Getting some interesting talks
So thank you for the love and keep your eyes on our socials.
And please do. We'll prompt this with socials, but please do send us your Nisht for me's and also any Hamish Flexes out there. We'd love to hear about.
Oh, definitely.
Just pile those in on Instagram.
Yeah. I've got a friend of the pod, Katie Colton. When we first launched, Nay Showman said, "I've got a Nisht for me, rain." I'm not quite sure that works. It's got to be something that unless there are people, who like literally sinking in the rain type characters out there. It's got to be something. People.
I get it though. I mean, mine last week wasn't really a valid. Wiping kids' bums. Yeah. There's not a huge army of people out there who are like, yes, that's my jam. So yeah, it's not that easy. But I think it's got to be something that most people or a lot of people like. But for you, it's just Nisht for you.
Nisht for you. So until next time, Ein Cael Don Alam.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talis bags away.
Keep telling your friends.
Absolutely.
Bye.
Bye.